Picture a palace. Marble floors, a throne room, a bloodline that decides who rules next. Not an election, not a resume, just birth order and family loyalty. Now picture that same structure, minus the palace, minus the crown, minus the guards in silk robes, hiding in plain sight inside a headquarters tower in Seoul. Run by a family whose name is on your phone, your television, and possibly the hospital where you were born. In 1910, Korea's last king lost his throne. The Joseon Dynasty, which had ruled the peninsula for over 500 years, ended under Japanese annexation, and the idea of a Korean royal family faded into history books and palace tours. So why do so many scholars of modern Korea argue that, decades later, the country quietly built something that functions an awful lot like a monarchy again, just wearing a different name? To understand the comparison, you have to look at what a chaebol actually is. The word combines the Korean terms for wealth and clan, and it describes a business conglomerate controlled not by shareholders in any meaningful sense, but by a single founding family, passed down through generations like an inheritance rather than a career. Samsung is the largest and most globally recognized example, but it's far from alone. Hyundai, LG, SK, and several others follow a similar pattern. Enormous economic empires, spanning industries that have nothing to do with each other, held together by bloodline rather than by merit or market competition. Here's where the monarchy comparison starts to feel less like a rhetorical flourish and more like a structural observation. Political scientist Aidan Foster Carter, who has written extensively on Korean political economy, has described chaebol succession as functioning through mechanisms that would look familiar to any student of hereditary rule. Complex cross-shareholding structures specifically designed to let a founding family retain controlling influence over a company while owning only a small fraction of its actual shares. Family council decisions determining who inherits leadership and succession disputes that occasionally spill into public view looking remarkably like a palace intrigue, except conducted through corporate boardrooms and civil courts instead of a royal court. Picture how Samsung's own succession actually played out, because it illustrates the pattern concretely. When founder Lee Byung-chul built the company from a small trading firm in the 1930s, he explicitly favored a chosen successor within his family over other claimants, echoing succession logic more commonly associated with royal houses than modern corporations. That successor's own son later inherited leadership in turn, and control has continued moving through the same family line ever since, weathering legal controversies, health crises, and public scrutiny along the way, much as a royal succession might weather palace politics, without the underlying inheritance structure itself ever seriously being dismantled. Some of these succession moments have played out with a drama that would fit comfortably inside a period drama about a royal court. Family members have sued each other over inheritance shares. A years-long coma left a company's actual leader unable to make decisions while control quietly passed to the next generation in practice, long before it passed on paper. Bribery scandals involving political favors in exchange for smoother succession have reached the country's own presidency, briefly shaking public confidence, only for business to resume largely as before once the immediate legal storm passed. None of this reads like ordinary corporate governance. It reads like succession politics, the kind historians usually reserve for royal courts and noble houses, just relocated into shareholder meetings and courtroom testimony. Now here's the counterintuitive twist that complicates the simple story of families exploiting a system. This structure wasn't smuggled in against the government's wishes. It was actively encouraged by the same state that abolished the actual monarchy. Economist Alice Amsden has documented how, in the 1960s and 1970s, the government deliberately funneled financial support toward a small number of family-controlled firms rather than diffuse ownership structures, precisely because concentrated family control allowed faster, more decisive decision-making during a period when the country needed enormous coordinated industrial bets made quickly. In other words, the state that ended one dynasty helped construct the conditions for new ones, because dynastic concentration of power turned out to be economically useful for the specific kind of rapid industrialization Korea was attempting. But there's an important reason this system survived for so long. It worked. The same Chaebol structure that concentrated enormous economic power in a handful of families also helped transform South Korea from one of the world's poorest countries into a global industrial powerhouse within a single generation. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and SK didn't just become wealthy companies. They became instruments of national development, building ships, cars, electronics, chemicals, and eventually technologies that South Korea now exports to the entire world. That success created something more powerful than legal protection: public legitimacy. It's difficult to dismantle a system when the system helped build the country you live in. There's a real cost side to this comparison worth sitting with honestly. Sociologist Eunmi Kim has pointed out that Chaebol dominance has made it structurally difficult for smaller, non-family businesses to compete for capital, talent, and market access, much as smaller noble houses might have struggled to compete with an entrenched royal family for resources and influence under the old dynastic system. Ordinary employees can rise fairly high within these companies through genuine merit, but the very top of the pyramid, the actual controlling ownership, remains almost entirely closed to anyone outside the founding bloodline, regardless of talent or tenure. It helps to compare this to how ownership typically works in other large, wealthy economies. In the United States, founding families of major corporations almost always see their direct control diluted within a generation or two. As shares spread across public markets, institutional investors, and professional management teams who owe their position to performance rather than surname. Korea's Chaebol system developed differently on purpose, engineered through legal and financial structures specifically designed to prevent that dilution from happening, preserving family control across multiple generations in a way that would be almost unrecognizable to shareholders of an equivalent American or European company. And this is where the monarchy analogy begins to break down. Unlike a traditional royal dynasty, Chaebol families cannot simply rule by birthright alone. They still have to compete globally, satisfy investors, survive legal challenges, and deliver results. Samsung cannot sell a bad smartphone simply because its chairman was born into the right family. The family may inherit control, but the company still has to win in the marketplace. That's what makes the Chaebol system so complicated. It combines hereditary power with brutally competitive capitalism. Picture the Fuller arc, side by side. A founding patriarch in the 1930s building a trading company from almost nothing, then deliberately choosing a family successor over more experienced outside candidates. A government official in the 1960s funneling state resources toward that same family's growing conglomerate, betting on concentrated family control as an engine for national development. A third-generation heir today, inheriting not just wealth but effective command over companies employing hundreds of thousands of people, navigating that inheritance through courtrooms and shareholder meetings rather than a coronation, but ending up with something functionally similar to what a crown prince once might have inherited. Each piece connects to the same underlying pattern: concentrated hereditary power, rebuilt inside a modern corporate structure after the original royal version was formally dissolved. Here's what this reflects back onto you. It's tempting to hear monarchy used about a modern company and assume it's simply a provocative metaphor, more clever than accurate. The more honest picture is that scholars use this comparison because the underlying mechanism genuinely rhymes. Concentrated, inherited authority over an enormous population's economic life, passed down along family lines rather than earned through open competition, legitimized less by formal law than by decades of accumulated cultural acceptance that this is simply how power in Korea has always worked, Dynasty or no dynasty. You started this learning that Korea's last king lost his throne in 1910. Now you know the throne itself may have disappeared, but the underlying logic of hereditary, concentrated authority didn't actually go anywhere. It just changed its address from a palace to a headquarters tower and traded a crown for a controlling share.